Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to each of you for being here and for your testimony on this very important issue. I think we can agree that exploiting children online is one of the worst dangers and one of the worst social threats that we face. But let's talk about whether or not being callous towards children's safety is actually a part of the business model of some of these companies. And my concern is that it is. And I think you don't have to look any further than the reports about YouTube, the New York Times reporting last month about the algorithm collecting and funneling videos of minor children to pedophiles. And of course, as we have discussed this morning, allowing those pedophiles to contact the children. This report was sickening, but I think what was even more sickening was YouTube's refusal to do anything about it. YouTube admitted that they could do something about it. They could stop auto-referring these videos of minors to pedophiles, but they chose not to do so. Why not? Because their model is that 70% of their business, 70% of their traffic, it comes from these auto-recommended videos. In other words, there's ad revenue that would be lost if they actually took some enforcement steps here, took some steps to stop this exploitation of children. So my first question is, does anybody here think that one of the world's largest, most powerful companies should be privileging their ad revenue over children's safety? Well, that's why I introduced a bill that would require YouTube to do what it can do, what it absolutely has the power to do, which is to stop recommending videos that feature children unless those videos fall within very carefully tailored safety and exceptions. And it would apply not only to YouTube, but it would apply to any video hosting company. It's common sense legislation. I hope this committee will hold a hearing on it. I hope we'll mark it up. I hope we'll refer it to the full Senate and act to actually protect our children online. Let me just ask you, Mr. McKenna, do you agree that for some of these companies, aspects of their business model actually conflict with protecting the safety of children?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hawley. I absolutely agree that the business model based on reach and engagement is one that absolutely conflicts with protection.
What else can we do about that? Tell us more about how the design of some of these companies' model and their platforms pulls against the goal of safety for children online.
Well, the simple premise of Snapchat, which is one based on images that disappear, right? They have a model that wants young people to use an app that neurologically they're not ready to use. And so the entire platform is built on something that we would argue that teens just are not ready to engage in. So Snapchat could be doing so much more in terms of the types of friend referrals that happen, in terms of what happens in Discover News. They know that in Discover, which is where third parties will put articles, is where revenue occurs. That's where engagement happens. Again, they're based on an engagement model. They want more people looking at that content, and that just feeds that cycle of revenue.
Is it your sense that Snapchat and other similar platforms are engaging in practices that, at least as it relates to their child users, are exploitative?
Absolutely. Knowing in no other places where we have significant numbers of children spending time do we allow so few controls to govern those environments, right? I mean, 16 million teens are using Snapchat. Even if the app were to say that we are for adults only, I believe they have a duty of care responsibility for a population of teens that they know are using their app to protect them.
Professor Campbell, you were nodding your head. Do you agree with that, and do you want to add something on this point? And then I want to ask you about COPPA.
Yes, I would add, just to give you an example of how I think a company could do a better job of structuring its products. YouTube actually has a product intended for children called YouTube Kids, and it's got some good policies. The problem, again, is that they're not really enforcing those policies. There's a lot of content even on YouTube Kids that is inappropriate, and we've complained to the FTC about this. So one of the reasons is that they designed the product so that all programming on YouTube Kids first has to be on YouTube. So all of these kids' channels are on YouTube, and so kids are watching it on YouTube instead of YouTube Kids, and then they're getting exposed to all the advertising, and of course, Google's benefiting from those ad revenues. So if they had designed YouTube Kids differently so that it was actually protected space for children, that would have been a good thing, but that's not what they chose to do.
Let me thank you for that. That's really helpful. Let me just ask you briefly here about COPPA. You mentioned the need for the FTC to get serious about enforcement for updates to COPPA. I'm proud to be co-sponsoring with Senator Markey, major update to COPPA, the first in 20 years, that would provide sweeping new privacy protections for children. It would also apply to any company that has reason to know that a child is a user, even if they don't have actual knowledge, constructive knowledge, which we think is hugely significant for actually holding these companies accountable. Let me just ask you, though, you mentioned earlier that the FTC may be able to use some rulemaking authority under COPPA, either the existing COPPA or our proposed update, to require new default privacy settings for devices or on platforms. Should we be thinking about in the COPPA update including language to this effect? I mean, what would you counsel us to do to make this COPPA update as tough and as comprehensive as possible?
Well, one problem is what we call dark patterns, and that's when a company will create incentives for users to do something that is not necessarily in the user's interest, but does benefit the company. And so what Mr. McKenna was talking about with making it difficult to find privacy settings, not setting defaults to protect privacy, those are part of the dark pattern problem. They can make it very easy for them to do what you want to do and make it very difficult, even if you make a lot of effort, to change those privacy settings or protect yourself.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your work on this important topic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.